Okay, so this video is going to be part of a series called The Players, uh, and it's a series that provides, insights and background for people to know who knew what when, as far as the rail scandal. So this one in particular is going to focus on former Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. And again, even though, Justin Trudeau and a lot of these players are Canadian, these issues, because the rail carriers, CN and CPKC, have massive rail lines in the US also, and because so many of the players escaped to the US, including, people like Jim Vena, who was Chief Operations Officer when conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed. Um, you know, the US rail industry, these issues impact you 100% now, especially since Jim Vena is at he's CEO of Union Pacific, which is now looking to do the biggest merger ever in the US rail industry by acquiring Norfolk Southern. And so, do you really want Jim Vena in that position? Um, and influencing all the U.S. frontline rail workers, whatever. This would be the first transcontinental railway if that merger is approved. So even though, you may see, oh, this player is Justin Trudeau, don't think that because you're in America, this does not have information you need to know, because it absolutely will have information you need to know. And so I would, tell you, if you are part of the rail industry, whether or not you're a rail worker, a rail customer, a rail investor, you should be going through all these videos, because the impacts of this rail scandal are across Canada and the US. And so, again, welcome to Rail Families United, and let us take a look at former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Okay, when it comes to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he received almost every single email that I sent to the Minister of Transportation, Marc Garneau, who was his Minister of Transportation for like 4 years, and the RCMP Commissioner and all deputy commissioners are appointed by the Prime Minister, and it's important to know that they serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. So, with Trudeau, even if he did refer this to the RCMP, would the RCMP really do a proper investigation? I don't think so, especially not given conflicts of interests when it comes to the RCMP itself and CN Rail. And we're going to get into more of that. If you want to look at the video called Bring in the Police, I would suggest all people look at that when it comes to who was the chief of police at CN Rail when conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed, and others. Very eye-opening. Trudeau could have referred all of these issues of rail safety, of rail worker safety, of financial fraud to the RCMP over his many years in office. He was there for 9 years. And, you know, to me, it appears they chose not to refer this to the RCMP for proper investigation, and basically chose not to do anything in matters that were criminal. And that's a big mistake, because now that they know the US is involved, they never would have guessed that I would go and dump these issues on a US administration, because they didn't know that I may be born in Canada, but I'm a naturalized US citizen, and I have no problem, after I've given you years to address these issues, and Trudeau has known of these issues since at least 2016. My conscience is clear. If the US will address these issues, and the US rail unions will help push these issues, because now they're impacted by this and their frontline rail workers are impacted, well, so be it. If Canada needs to get its slap coming back at it from the US, I'm perfectly fine with that. They've had more than enough time to do the right thing, and at every turn they chose not to. So again, why did Chrystia Freeland, as Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and or the Minister of Finance, not refer these issues of lack of proper disclosure of material facts to rail investors? to the RCMP for proper investigation. Again, after years of knowing what she also knew as the Minister of Finance. If that's not opening Canada up to massive liabilities, now that a second country is involved, because she knew CN and CP had massive rail lines in the US. Oh, we're just going to allow players to escape to the US. And that's all we're going to do? Not good enough, Ms. Freeland. Now, Minister of Transportation, Chrystia Freeland. So she knew, as did Trudeau, as I'm sure probably did Carney, that this was going to be their year of disclosure torpedoes. Okay, so what you're seeing here, if you look at the arrows here at the very top, you can see that these are just some of the emails I sent to Justin Trudeau. And these couple of pages that I'm going to provide to you are only for 2024, and these are only the emails with attachments that he received. That's not even all the other emails. And so just to, let you know, Trudeau absolutely knew. If I'm telling you that somebody knew, you can take my word for it. They knew. They received these emails, and there's no denying that these were sent to them. So when I tell you Trudeau knew and Freeland knew, they absolutely did. Now, I'm going to tell you for a fact, Trudeau over the years literally would have received hundreds of emails from me. Chrystia Freeland, not as many as Trudeau, but the Minister of Transportation at the time, Marc Garneau, would also have received hundreds of emails. I included also the Ministers of Public Safety, the Ministers of Justice, the Office of the Governor General of Canada, which is the highest office in Canada, since that is, at the time, it was the Queen's representative, but now it's the King's representative. So people at the very highest levels in the government of Canada knew of these issues, and they've known for a very long time. Now, if you look at this continuation here of just the emails to Trudeau in 2024, and let's see, if you look at this one that I sent out in June 28th, 2024, that was right after, let's see, it was about a month and a half after I had gone down and dropped thousands of pages for J.D. Vance before Trump picked him as his running mate. I also about 2,500 pages of that was the rail scandal. There were two other massive scandals impacting the U.S. that the government of Canada had also been hiding, and those also impacted U.S. national security. So, there was so much information that I had to document over a decade pertaining to three absolutely massive scandals impacting both Canada and the US. And so, and the rail scandal is not even the ugliest one. There's one that is, I would say, 100 times uglier. And that one, I will only trust to President Trump. So, when people look and say, why does Trump so hate Freeland? Why does Trump so hate the government of Canada? I think he's got very good reason not to like the government of Canada, given what I dropped with his administration. But anyways, if you look at this one here in June, you can see that the title of it was Time's Up, Scandal Hiders, Now It's My Turn. That was me telling them, you've had enough time, now it's my turn to have these issues seriously addressed. Because President Trump was back in office, or he was running in 2024. I knew that he would be running again. And so that's why I went to the office of J.D. Vance, who happened to be my brother's senator in Ohio. I also went at that time to that was at the end of April, the very last week of April. I also went to the office of Jim Jordan. I also went to the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. And I followed up with emails. And I went to another big player too, Activist Investor, Ancora. And I'll do a separate file on Ancora, unions, whatever, in the players series. So When it comes to who knew what when, there's no denying that Trudeau and Freeland, like I said, there's a good reason I think that Chrystia Freeland is now Minister of Transportation, because this email on Time's Up, now it's my turn, went out in June of 2024. And it was shortly after that, in December, I think, that, well, she resigned as Deputy Prime Minister, basically threw Trudeau under the bus, and now she comes back in 2025 as the Minister of Transportation under Mark Carney. I suspect for very good reasons. Okay, so what you've got here at the top snippet shows again Justin Trudeau, and you can see the date there on the far right shows 2016. So he's absolutely known of the rail scandal since at least 2016. And that's when I first flagged it to US authority. And again, that was in June of 2016. And so this was actually provided to the US under the Obama administration back in my naive days. And so I have no doubt that these issues were very likely hidden from President Trump, who had still not even won the 2016 election. And, you know, Bill Gates owned like 15% of CN Rail stock at the time. Big, you know, Obama supporter, big Democrat, whatever. And so I have no doubt that, you know, the Obama administration did all they could to hide this scandal from President Trump. And that would include the deep state behind the scenes. So there's a reason, you know, I'm naive, trusting, oh, somebody's going to tell them. I suspect not. And that's why I did my personal delivery back in 2024, in April of 2024, to then J.D. Vance, to before Trump picked him as his running mate, and also to Jim Jordan and to the rail union, among others. But, you know, along with what I had given J.D. Vance was a beautiful file that I call the lawfare file that looked at all the players who had a role to act in the 3 scandals I had referred to the U.S. And, you know, people wonder, why is Trump going after legal, you know, law firms, etc.? What I had given Trump via J.D. Vance and Jim Jordan, what I call the lawfare file, that was a 60-page file, and it had, you know, a lot of backup information on a memory stick. And I basically, you know, told them, give this to President Trump. Because if I can knock out, you know, if I could join the dots for 5 to 10 people or groups who were going after President Trump in the lawfare in New York, you might think that's just coincidence. What if I can join the dots for potentially 25 to 27 players? And I'm talking including Alvin Bragg, lead prosecutors, you know, big law firm, extremely big law firm, the one of the lead investigators, the forensic, one of the players as the forensic accounting firm going after Trump, and on and on and on. If I can join the dots to some of those people who would have had a duty to act in the 3 scandals I had referred to the Securities and Exchange Commission, via whistleblower, via formal complaints to the Securities and Exchange Commission under the Obama administration. Well, if they didn't act when they had a duty to act in their previous roles, and I'm talking about these people that were in my lawfare file, maybe they were going after Trump because they had a much more personal stake in going after President Trump. Because perhaps the bottom line was, either we keep him out of the office, out of the White House, or put him in jail, or maybe he can throw us in jail. So, you know, folks, when you understand the issues behind the scenes, kind of gives you a different perspective. And again, the rail scandal was only one scandal that I had dropped with J.D. Vance, Jim Jordan, etc., and said, give these to President Trump. And actually, when I went to the office of Jim Jordan, the person I spoke to there kept, because I dropped 4 copies of these files, and I said, there's 1 copy for Jim Jordan, the other 3 are for President Trump, for him, and 2 of them for his lawyers. And this person kept looking at, and then there was 4 copies of the memory stick in addition to hard copies of the 60-page lawfare file. And I said to this assistant, I said, you need to give this to President Trump. And I showed her in the lawfare file just some of the dots. And this person could clearly see the implications of what I was dropping on that desk. And she kept texting. The whole time I was there, she was texting. I'm sure she was probably texting Jim Jordan saying, get over here and come and get this information. Because I was there for probably about 45 minutes, and the whole time she's texting while she's talking to me. So when she's looking at me twice, she said, oh, we're not supposed to accept memory sticks because I'm sure they're concerned about, putting viruses on, the U.S. government systems. And but the information I was providing her was just too good. And I said, you have to accept the memory sticks. That's all the backup information for what's in the lawfare file. And it's all information tied to these 3 massive scandals. And so I finally looked at her and I said, I'll tell you what, why don't you let President Trump decide whether or not he's willing to pooch a laptop, his personal laptop, to see what's on these files. And then she kind of looked at me and she goes, okay, with a big smile. That's the answer. I'm giving you this as a concerned U.S. citizen. It's matters of national security. Trump wasn't president at the time, but he was definitely running. And I knew, it's my personal information. These are my personal files. If I want to get them to a U.S. candidate running for president because I cannot trust the opposition as far as the Democrats any further than I can throw them, because nothing had been done in these issues, and I see all this lawfare going on against Trump, when so many of those players had to do with my issues in their previous roles, I'm sorry, but, it's my personal information. And Jim Jordan, as a congressman of Ohio, where my brother lived, and I'm a U.S. citizen residing in Canada, if I want to bounce something to someone who's very high up as a U.S. citizen, I have a right to do that. And Jim Jordan, if I'm asking you to do this as a favor to me, or J.D. Vance, who was, I believe, on the transportation committee at the time, here you go. Here's some very interesting information for you. Please get it to the proper hands. So, as a U.S. citizen residing in Canada, I basically had no congressman, no senator of my own. So I picked my brothers. That's where I went. I knew that Jim Jordan was involved in looking at a lot of issues tied to the lawfare against Trump at the time, and a lot of the corruption, in the deep state. And so that's why I gave him these files. But anyways, so just some of the background information that I choose now to share with people. But you can see here, Trudeau clearly knew of the rail scandal since at least 2016. And this, if you look in the bottom email there where the lower arrow on the left, that was a document that was attached, which he also received, and it was called CN Whistleblower 1 document. So he received that. And if you look at the other people who received that, you can see that it went to Rona Ambrose, who was the leader of the opposition for the Conservative Party at the time, Thomas Mulcair, who was the leader of the NDP, another opposition party in Canada. It also went to the Governor General's office, the Minister of Justice, of Canada, to Ralph Goodale, who was the Minister of Public Safety at the time. It went to Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was the actual Minister of Justice, and to Marc Garneau, who was Minister of Transportation. And so you're not going to tell me that we didn't know about these issues. These people were always on distribution lists, whatever. They had more than enough to know they had serious issues on their hands, and they've known for a very long time. Okay, now on this snippet of an email, again, I did a search in my email on Justin Trudeau, and you can see here that this one had to do with rail, Transport Canada crucified by its own words, and it had to do with death cover-ups in the matters pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. By early 2018, I would say March, April timeframe, I knew without a doubt there had been a massive cover-up in the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. I didn't realize it would take me several more years to get to just how bad that cover-up was and who all these players were. And it literally took years to put all this together. The government of Canada fought me at every opportunity when it came to my requests for information, etc. And so, stall tactics, delay, outright refused to give me any information that should have been public. But you can see the date here on this email was in 2018. And again, you can see the players. Andrew Scheer now was the leader of the opposition for the Conservatives, but it went to Trudeau, some representatives in Ontario, because this also impacted rail lines in Toronto, lines that were owned by the government of Ontario, basically, like Ontario Northland. And so I also was including premiers of provinces on these emails. And so, they've all known. I turned to everybody I could possibly turn in trying to get these issues addressed. And again, they all failed to do so. They all turned a blind eye, all hid it from the public. In my opinion, I have no pity for any of them. This is such massive financial fraud, massive breach of public safety, and misappropriation of public funds to garbage rail worker death investigations, and then garbage rail worker death investigation reports, and then garbage Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada hearings, where they set very nasty precedents for all rail workers. Never waste a good opportunity. We're going to use the death of a frontline rail worker to make things even easier on rail carriers and the government of Canada. The reason clearly that Trudeau and his government did not investigate these issues is because the more I uncovered, the more it was absolutely clear that the Transportation Safety Board, the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada, and Transport Canada, as well as the Ministers of Justice would have been involved in this, were all part of the death cover-ups going on in the rail industry. So are you really going to refer this for proper investigation? Not likely. And if you're the RCMP and these are your bosses and you can see the implications, are you really going to do a proper investigation? Not likely, even if it is referred to you. Okay, so again, folks, it's clear that Trudeau had received a lot of emails from me, as had Chrystia Freeland. And so there's no reason for anybody in the government of Canada to try and argue they did not know of these issues. I CC'd the ministers of public safety, ministers of justice, of finance, in a lot of them ministers of labor, minister of national revenue, because of the potential liabilities due to now that could be imposed on the government of Canada in lawsuits, and on and on and on. And so and the emails I showed you for Trudeau, those were only for 2024 with attachments. He received many, many more without attachments. And same with Freeland. Freeland has known of these issues since at least 2019. So again, that is 6 years ago. And only now you're starting to want to overhaul regulations and want to start addressing issues in transportation as the new Minister of Transportation? I'm sorry, Minister of Transportation Freeland, too little too late. You could have done a lot as Deputy Prime Minister and as the Minister of Finance of Canada. You chose to engage in financial fraud by deceiving all Canadian taxpayers. So ask me if I have any pity for now Minister of Transportation, Chrystia Freeland. And ask me if I think that, the U.S. administration should have any pity for any of the players in these scandals. Absolutely not. So this concludes the video on Justin Trudeau, former Prime Minister of Canada, and when he first became aware of issues pertaining to the rail scandal as far as fake qualifications and later death cover-ups in the rail industry in Canada. And again, the fact that a lot of the players were allowed to escape to the U.S. rail industry rather than being prosecuted by Justin Trudeau, who, having been in office for 9 years, clearly had more than enough time to do proper investigations and bring some of these people to accountability, something he completely failed to do as the Prime Minister of Canada. And again, the issues of financial fraud, breach of public trust, they all apply, in my opinion, to Justin Trudeau also. So I will see you on the next one, and until then, have a great day.